Hello everyone. Ethical considerations in research are important considerations. And like research in other sciences, research in social sciences also need to follow certain ethical considerations. Student researchers often face difficulties and they have questions related to ethical considerations in social science research. This particular brief presentation is about some of the questions and some of the considerations related to research ethics, especially in the field of social sciences. So, we will briefly begin with a general definition of ethical considerations in social sciences research. We could define ethical considerations as the principles and practices that make the process of research ethical. And what do that we mean by that is that an ethical research process is a process that follows established moral norms and values associated with research in a field of study. So, ethical considerations will also depend on the field of study in which the research is being conducted. The aim basically of taking care of ethical issues is that we need to make the research process a process that is a genuine attempt to explore and promote the cause of scientific knowledge. So this is how and so this is what we actually mean by ethical considerations. Now there are certain aspects, certain factors that we need to think about when we are thinking about ethical consideration in terms of research. And so let us see what are important ethical considerations. Here are some of the most important ethical considerations. There are other more detailed considerations as well, but these are the general considerations that are required actually in most social sciences researches. So the first one is actually voluntary participation, then informed consent, anonymity and confidentiality, and safety of participants, which means actually research participants, and number 5, genuine reporting of the research process. Now we will briefly explore these 5 important considerations in the following slide. So let us begin with this one, voluntary participation. What do we actually mean by this? Generally, participation on the part of the research participants, or in some cases the research subjects, should be voluntary, which actually means that the type of participation that is required on the part of the participant and the nature of participation should be based on the voluntary consent of the one who is participating in the study or in the research as a participant. And this actually means that there should be no element of coercion. That means there should be no compulsion in any way on the part of the participant or the respondent to take part in a particular study. Researchers and participants' positions might impact participation. Especially researchers who are in a position of power might impact the participants' intentions or actions to participate or not to participate in particular study. For example, if we take an example of the educational context, a school teacher or a university academic or a university professor who wants to conduct a study, if that study involves his students to participate in the study, there might be an element of influence because of his or because of the researcher's position as a teacher or as an academic, and the student position which might be vulnerable, and so there might be an element of compulsion over there. So in that case, participation might be involuntary, although this might not always be the case. So the researchers and the participants' status and position also plays its role in terms of whether participation is voluntary or it's not voluntary. Then the what, when, where, how of participation should also be voluntary. This actually means that what should be the nature of participation, when should that participation take place, where should that participation take place, and how or the manner in which that participation is actually expected should also be voluntary, and the participant or the respondents actually should have consent in order related to the what, the when, the where, and the how of participation. Then, in line with the abilities of the participants, research participation should be in line with the abilities, the skills, the capacities, and the capabilities of the research participants. An ethical research process will not be based on an expectation from the participant that is beyond his or her capacity. For example, if a researcher wants to conduct interviews, generally it should be according to the convenience of the participant. Let us say, in a particular context, the participant is convenient to respond in his or her mother tongue. He or she should not be expected to respond in a particular language that is more convenient to the researcher. So the voluntary participation also means that the participation of the respondents or the participants should be in line with their abilities. And there should be, again, the researcher should make it a point that the respondents or the participants are actually not asked questions that are beyond their capacity or beyond their knowledge. So that is also something that will come in the fold of voluntary participation. Then the other consideration, important consideration in terms of that comes in the ethics of research category is the informed consent. And this actually means that the participants should be informed related to the what, why, and how of the research. And so the participants should consent, and their consent should be informed consent. That actually means that the participants should have adequate information regarding the research that they are participating in. So they should not be expected to participate in something, in some research topic that they don't have adequate information about. Then the informed consent also includes that the participants should know about who the researcher is, or who the researchers are, and what are their aims and objectives. So besides this, the participants should also know the implications of their participation. So what their participation implies for them, what results can come as a result of their participation or non-participation in particular research study. So that is also something very important. The informed consent also includes the information related to the expected contribution of the research participant. So how should the research participant be contributing? In other words, how are they expected to contribute, which means actually what the time requirement on the part of the participants, and the participation type. What type of participation should it be? Will they be giving interviews or questionnaires, and how much time will be required for that? Will they be observed, and things like that? So these should also be clear to them. Then what are the potential consequences of their participation, which actually means there might be certain benefits related to the participation of participants in a particular research study. But there could also be stresses, there could also be issues that might come as a result of their participation in the study. So the informed consent actually means that the respondents or the participants should have knowledge related to the consequences of their participation for them. And then how will the data that the respondents gave, that the participants gave, how will that data be used in research or otherwise? And so this is something, for example, like if a student researcher is conducting research for their PhD study or for their MPhil study, one of the things that the researcher need to tell the participant is that some part of the data that is coming from the participants, such as quotations from their interviews, might be directly used in the thesis, and also possibly in other research publications. And similarly, they should be informed that some of the findings directly based on their views might also be presented in research conferences. So how the data will be used is something that participants should know about, and this will be included in the informed consent. Then two very important considerations related to ethics that makes the process of research ethical is anonymity and confidentiality. Anonymity actually means that the researcher does not know individual identity of the participants, and actually no one knows the individual identity of the participants, because if the researcher does not know the individual identity of the participants, their identity will not be individually reported in the report, and other people might also not know the individual identity of the participants. This is generally possible. Anonymity is generally possible in more quantitative survey type of studies, where the researcher does not essentially need to have direct contact with the respondents to get data. So the researcher could also make use of other people, or they could make use of electronic means of access to respondents. And so the respondents might fill their questionnaires and forms without naming themselves or identifying themselves. And so in this case, anonymity is, so if the researcher has assured anonymity to the participants, it is important that individual identity of the participant is actually not known either to the researcher or to other people. And then confidentiality is another aspect of ethical considerations. Confidentiality actually means that the researcher knows the individual identity of the participants, but keeps their identity confidential. That is, identity not revealed in the research reports or to other people that are related to research. So the researcher knows the identity of the individual participants, but the researcher does not reveal that identity either in the reports, if he or she is a student researcher, they might not even reveal the identity of the individual participants to their research supervisors or to other people related to the research thesis. So that's there is this difference between anonymity and confidentiality, and anonymity and confidentiality are important ethical considerations in research. And again, the basic aim of this is keeping respondents anonymous and keeping information related to them confidential. Then we move on to the this very important aspect of ethical considerations, and that's safety of participants. Actually, most of the research, the ethical considerations in research are interlinked, and they are inclusive rather than exclusive. So we just discussed anonymity and confidentiality. But anonymity and confidentiality are also relevant to, and they actually are they are there in the research process in order to make the research participants safe. And so safety of participants is also an important consideration, which is to keep in view the overall well-being of the research participants. And that actually means keeping them safe from physical harm or social harm or economic disadvantage or psychological advantages or psychological harm. So the overall well-being actually means that the respondents or the participants should not come under any physical threat or social harm, or they should not face any economic problems or psychological problems because of their participation in your research study. And so this is something that's considered important in terms of ethical considerations. Then the last one, which is very, very important consideration, is that the research process is not just a process of exploring knowledge and adding to human knowledge, but also actually adding to the sources of knowledge in a genuine way. And that is possible when we are actually, as researchers, when we report the process and product or outcomes of research in a genuine and factual way. So genuine reporting, factual reporting of what our research aims were, then what data collection and analysis processes were used during the research process, genuine and true reporting of those, genuine reporting of the actual research results, then what are the actual genuine implications of our research process and product, and also including potential limitations of the research process and outcomes. All of these actually aid to the genuineness of the research process and to the validity and reliability of the research process. And that is why we as researchers are ethically bound to report on these essential aspects of the research process in a factual manner, in a genuine manner. So there are some other research studies, and there are books and resources that you can study further in order to get more knowledge related to this very important area of the research process.